The ground was dry, cracked like the skin of a long-dead corpse, stretched tight under a pale, endless sky. The wind moved through the brittle grass like a whisper from a ghost, carrying the heavy smell of dust, sorrow, and something older than time. Something no one dared speak of anymore. Hannah Moore adjusted her worn straw hat with a trembling hand and wiped the sweat from her face. The sun had barely begun to rise, but she'd already been up for hours, wrestling with a splintered fence post that wouldn't hold. Her arms ached, her throat was dry, and the last of the well water sat in a tin bucket beside her, barely enough to make it through the night. There was almost nothing left, not of the water, not of the ranch, not of her strength, and certainly not of love. Her husband had died that past winter, suddenly, violently. One night he'd coughed, and by morning he was gone. The doctor had no answers. The preacher offered hollow prayers. Whatever took him had no name. The town of Dry Hollow buried him fast and forgot even faster. They looked at Hannah the way people look at bad omens, too young to be a widow, too stubborn to marry again, too proud to leave. She lived alone, a mile past the mesquite trees, where only fools or haunted people kept homes. Most days, she didn't know which one she was. The wind shifted again, colder now. The sky dimmed just a little, like something had passed in front of the sun. A buzzard flew slow circles overhead, its wings stretched wide, almost still in the dead air. That's when she saw it. At first, Hannah thought it was just old blankets thrown out by travelers, but as she stepped up the ridge behind the barn, her heart stopped. Her hands began to shake. It was a man. He was lying on his side, barely breathing. His chest rose and fell in tiny gasps. Blood had soaked into the dry earth beneath him, making the dirt dark, cracked, and sticky like old rust. His skin was ghost pale, lips cracked. Long black hair clung to his face and shoulders, matted with dirt. He had no boots. Only a torn deerskin shirt clung to his chest, ripped open at the shoulder. The wound underneath was deep, so deep she could see the white of bone through the torn flesh. She staggered back, and then she saw the necklace, beads, a single feather. Apache. Her heart slammed so hard against her chest she felt sick. The stories she'd grown up hearing flooded her mind. Whispers of raids in the night, barns burning, babies stolen from their cradles. She remembered the sermons full of fear, the warnings spat like venom in saloons. People called them devils, in human skin. She stepped back. Then again. Her mouth dry, her throat frozen with fear. But then, he moved. Not fast, not like an attack. Just a slow, aching groan slipped from his mouth. He tried to lift his head, and failed. His body trembled like a leaf in the wind, and in that moment, just a moment, he didn't look like a monster from a storybook. He looked like a dying man. He was dying, and it was not going to be quick. Hannah stood frozen, her heart pounding loud in her ears as she looked down at the man bleeding into the dirt. His chest moved, barely. Each breath a shallow gasp, wet with pain. The blood had soaked deep into the earth like the land was drinking it, hungry for something more than water. She looked around. Nothing. The wind was still. The road was empty. Not even a bird sang in the trees. No one from town would come to help. Not for him. Not for an Apache. If they knew he was here, they might come only to finish the job. They wouldn't care if he bled out under the sun, with the ants and flies crawling over his body. To them, he was already dead. She should have walked away. Every part of her body screamed for it. But she didn't. Instead, she turned back toward the barn, her legs moving like they belonged to someone else. Moments later, she returned with a dented tin cup filled with water, the last water from her dying well. Every drop was precious. It could have lasted her until morning. It might have kept her alive. Now, she was giving it to a stranger who might kill her if he lived. She knelt beside him, heart racing, fear like ice crawling up her spine. She didn't ask his name. She didn't say a word. She just lifted his head gently, his skin burning hot with fever, and brought the cup to his cracked lips. He didn't drink at first. His eyelids fluttered open. His eyes were dark, wild, like an animal cornered. He stared at her deep and hard, and she felt something shift inside her chest. She didn't know if it was fear or something worse. Still, she waited. Then, slowly, his lips parted. He drank. Just a sip, but it was enough to keep the fire in his lungs alive. When he finished, she set the cup down and stood up, knees trembling. For a second, she thought he might reach for her, might speak or spit or curse her in words she didn't understand. Maybe he'd beg. Maybe he'd growl. Instead, he just looked at her. One long, heavy glance. Then his eyes closed, and he let out a breath. Not of pain. Not of anger. It was almost peace. Hannah turned away, her stomach tight with dread. She walked back to the house, unsure whether she had just saved a life or invited death to sleep under her roof. That night, she didn't rest. The candle burned low, casting long shadows that moved like fingers across the walls. Every creak of the wind made her flinch. Every heartbeat was a warning. She sat in her chair by the window, holding her dead husband's rifle across her lap. It wasn't loaded. She didn't know how to fire it, but it made her feel less helpless, less alone. Then, before dawn, the ground began to move. Not with wind, not with rain, but with hooves. Low at first. A sound like distant thunder, but it came from the dirt itself. It grew louder with every second, rising from the canyon like something. Ancient was waking up. Dozens of horses, dozens of riders. Hannah's breath caught in her throat. She rushed out to the porch. The sky had just begun to lighten. The sun hadn't yet risen, but she could see them. Silhouettes, shadows, figures rising over the ridge like ghosts. They didn't shout. They didn't whoop or cry out like the stories said they would. There was no dust, no screaming war chant, just the steady chilling rhythm of hooves pounding the earth. Closer, closer. Her legs wanted to run, but she stood still, barefoot on the wooden porch, the cold barrel of the old rifle gripped in both hands. Her mouth was dry. Her heart was screaming in her chest. Then she saw them clearly. Riders in every direction, their faces painted in silence, their eyes sharp. Feathers moved in the wind like whispers. Their horses formed a tight circle around the ranch. No one raised a weapon. No one said a word. But their presence was louder than any threat. It was a warning. And then, through the wall of riders, he came, the wounded man. No longer crawling in the dirt. He rode at the front now, his skin pale as death, his shirt still soaked in blood, his arm trembling as he held the reins. But he sat tall, alive. The cup of water still rested near the barn, and Hannah knew, as his dark eyes locked with hers once more across the yard, that what she had done could not be undone. She had not just saved a life. She had been seen. She had been chosen, and the price was coming. He dismounted slowly, like every movement weighed 1,000 pounds. But his eyes never left hers. The others waited, silent, still as stones. Hannah swallowed hard. Her throat felt like sandpaper, and her fingers tightened around the useless rifle. She didn't dare speak. She didn't even breathe too loudly. The wounded man stepped forward, his limp dragging in the dust, each step strained and quiet. Pain clung to his body like a shadow, but there was something powerful in the way he moved. Something calm and steady, like he had faced death before and didn't fear it any more. He stopped just a few feet from her. The morning wind picked up, tugging gently at his long black hair. It lifted just enough for Hannah to see his face more clearly now, young, maybe 30 at most, but marked by hard years. A deep scar slashed across his jaw, rough and pale, like a blade had tried to erase him. His eyes, sharp and black as obsidian, were not angry. They were older than his face, and heavy, so heavy. He raised one arm, slow and deliberate. Then he spoke a single word. She didn't understand it, but something in the way he said it made her skin prickle. Behind him, the other riders remained motionless, watching like wolves deciding whether to attack. Then the man turned to them and spoke again, this time in Apache, his voice low but clear. Hannah couldn't understand the words, but the sound of them felt old, sacred, almost, and whatever he said changed everything. Weapons lowered, bodies relaxed, eyes that had been full of warning now softened. A few men nodded. And just like that, like a switch had flipped, they began to turn away. One by one, the riders retreated, their horses turning with a quiet grace, hooves barely whispering against the dry earth. Some glanced back at her, others didn't, but not all of them left. The wounded man remained. Without asking, without a single word, he walked past her toward the barn. She turned slightly, watching in stunned silence. He moved like he'd done it 100 times before, as if the land, the dust, the wind, even her home, belonged to him now. He settled in the shade near the empty water trough, sat down, leaned back against a wooden post. He didn't look at her again, just closed his eyes, like he was finally somewhere safe, like he had always belonged there. Hannah stood frozen, still holding the rifle. Minutes passed, maybe hours. Time felt broken. The town would never believe this. They'd call her crazy. Worse, dangerous, a cursed widow, a traitor to her own kind. They'd whisper it in church, say she took in a savage, say she'd lose her mind, slit her own throat next. They'd call for fire, but no one had slit her throat, and nothing had burned, not yet. She stepped off the porch, her boots silent on the hard ground, and walked slowly toward him, still gripping the empty rifle like a shield made of lies. "You shouldn't be here," she said softly. The wind carried her words like a secret. "They'll come looking. The sheriff. The town." He opened his eyes, but said nothing. "I gave you water," she went on. "Not shelter, not this." Still, no reply. But in his eyes, just for a second, there was something like amusement, or defiance, or both. "Do you even understand me?" she asked, her voice sharper now, trembling with fear, with guilt, with something she couldn't name. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, rough, accented, but clear. "You saved," he said. "I protect." Hannah blinked. Her heart skipped a beat. "You protect?" He nodded once. Simple. Final. Like it was already decided. "Until you are safe." His words fell heavy between them, like stones in a well. She stared at him. Her heart pounded like thunder in her chest. This man, this stranger, this threat, this ghost, had claimed her safety like it was a debt paid in blood. She let out a breath and muttered, "You're as stubborn as every man I've ever met." He almost smiled, but behind that almost smile was something darker, because in that moment, Hannah realized something she hadn't before. He wasn't just promising to protect her. He was warning her, whatever he had seen, whatever was still coming. It was far worse than anything in Dry Hollow. And now, it was coming for her. By noon, the ranch was silent again. The warriors had vanished like ghosts, leaving behind only hoof prints, scattered dust, and a strange heaviness in the air. The land felt watched. The man, the Apache, whose name she still didn't know, stayed near the barn, always alert, always watching the horizon. He stood like a soldier waiting for orders from something ancient, something unseen. He never asked for food, never asked for shelter, but he worked. He mended the fence post she had failed to fix. His hands, rough and sure, split firewood with a steady rhythm. He drew water from the near-empty well, even as blood soaked through the dirty bandage on his shoulder. Every time Hannah tried to stop him, he'd say the same thing in his deep, quiet voice. You gave. I return." By evening, she found herself setting 2 plates at the porch table. One for herself, one for him. He nodded in thanks but didn't touch his food until she took the first bite. That night, as she blew out the lantern, she glanced out the window. He was still there, sitting beneath the stars, watching the darkness, not like a guest, not like a prisoner, but like a shadow, guarding something fragile. It wasn't comfort she felt. It was something stranger, something like safety, wrapped in mystery and danger. 2 nights passed, no one from Dry Hollow came, no sheriff, no neighbor, not even a curious rider passing through. The silence around her ranch was deeper than before, heavier, like the calm before a thunderstorm you couldn't see but could feel crawling over your skin. Every morning, the Apache man rose, before dawn. He fed the fire, brushed the horses, moved with less limp, though his bandage stayed tight and untouched. She offered to change it. He shook his head. Wound must stay. Why? He reached up and touched the feathered necklace around his neck. His fingers gentle, almost reverent. So they remember. Pain teaches. It was the longest thing he'd ever said to her. She stopped asking him to leave. She didn't want him to. His presence didn't just make her feel safe. It made the land feel alive again. The ranch breathed easier with him near. He never stepped inside the house. He never asked about her dead husband, James. He never touched her. But she noticed things. A cleaned rabbit left quietly near her door, a broken drawer fixed when she wasn't looking, her boots polished, like someone remembered what care felt like. No one had done these things for her since before the fever took James away. On the 3rd morning, she rode into town for flour and coffee. The moment she stepped into the general store, the room changed. The air snapped cold. Conversation stopped. 3 ranchers stood near the shelf. Eisen men, known for their cruelty. Their eyes slid to her like blades. "Back from your secret." "War camp, Hannah?" One of them sneered. She didn't answer. Just picked up her sack of flour. Another muttered, "They say you're keeping one of them out there, feeding him, sleeping with him." The words hit like ice water, but she didn't flinch until the sheriff appeared behind the counter. Sheriff Maddox wasn't cruel, but he wasn't brave either. He cleaned his glasses slowly. "Miss Moore, we've had reports." "Reports?" she repeated flatly. "Or gossip?" He sighed, jaw tight. "Tensions are high. People don't take kindly to someone harboring enemies." "He's not an enemy," she said. "He was dying. I gave him water." One of the men snorted. "That what you call it now?" "Enough," Maddox snapped. "Hannah, just be careful. Folks are nervous." She left without the coffee. That night, Hannah sat on the porch, arms crossed tight. Dusk crept in like a shadow with claws. The Apache man sat nearby, sharpening a small knife with a stone. The sound was slow, careful. Scrape, scrape, scrape. She felt his attention shift. He didn't look up. "They think I'm a traitor," she said softly. He paused. "They think I'm sleeping with you." Still nothing. She stared at him. "You're not going to say anything?" He tilted his head, thinking. Then he spoke. "Words are smoke." She almost laughed, a dry, broken sound. "Easy for you to say. You're not the one they'll run out of town." He studied her for a long moment. "You gave water to a dying man. That is not shame. That is root." "Root," she echoed. He nodded. "In my people, a woman who gives water gives life, not just to the body, to spirit. You gave what cannot be repaid." A long silence followed. Then, in a whisper, she said, "You speak like someone who's lost more than blood." His eyes darkened. He turned back to the blade. She didn't press. That night, long after the lantern went out, Hannah woke with a jolt, a scream, short, wet, cut off, then voices, loud, angry, too close. Wood splintered. Something crashed. She ran to The window. 5 men, lanterns swinging, guns in their hands. They had come while the world slept. They had come for her. One kicked open the barn door. Another shouted into the dark, "You in there, red lover! Come out!" She grabbed the rifle, not because she believed it would help, but because fear demanded she hold something. It was useless. The chamber was empty. Her hands trembled. The front door exploded inward with a sound like the world cracking in half. She barely had time to scream. Then a shadow moved, faster than any man should, a blur of bone, blade, and blood. A scream. Wet, ragged, cut short. Another. Then silence. Less than a minute. That's all it took. Hannah stood frozen in the doorway, her breath stuck in her throat like a bird trapped in a cage. The rifle hung from her hand, forgotten. He stood near the fence, panting, a dark shape in the moonlight. The Apache warrior, knife dripping. 4 men writhed on the ground, clutching wounds and begging for mercy. One had run, leaving behind a trail of blood and screams swallowed by the night. The warrior didn't chase him. He turned to Hannah. "I stay," he said simply, "until all danger sleeps." She nodded. Once, sharp. Her chest ached from the beating of her heart, but her feet stayed rooted to the porch. For the first time since James died, she didn't want to be alone anymore. By morning the broken men were gone. Hannah didn't ask where he took them, didn't ask how none had died despite all that blood, but she'd seen him move, like wind inside a storm, silent, deadly, inhuman. Death had come to her ranch that night, but something had held it back. Mercy? A message? Either way, the town stirred with a noise before noon. Whispers hissed through the streets like snakes through grass. By midday, Sheriff Maddox rode in with 2 deputies. They stopped just beyond her fence. They didn't cross it. Hannah met them on the porch, her face calm but her hands twitching under the shawl she'd wrapped around her shoulders like armor. "We heard there was an attack," Maddox said, removing his hat. "You all right?" "I'm alive." Her voice was plain, cold. His eyes shifted to the barn. Was it true? Were they after him? She didn't answer. "Hannah," Maddox said gently, "I can't protect you if you don't." "I never asked you to protect me," she snapped. A stillness fell. The wind stirred, lifting dust into the space between them. Something old and angry moved with it. One of the deputies spat. "She's hiding a savage. That's what this is." The men were trying to protect the town. Hannah stepped forward, her eyes blazing. "They broke into my home in the middle of the night." "You call that protection?" The deputy's face darkened. "You're putting all of us at risk," he growled. "Apaches like him, they'll turn on you fast." Then, behind the barn, a shadow moved. He was there. Takakota. He held no weapon, made no threat. He simply stood, still and watching. A presence more than a man. It was enough. The deputies reached for their guns. "Stand down!" Maddox barked, his voice cracking like a whip. Time froze. Takakota raised his hand slowly, then disappeared once more into the dark behind the barn, swallowed by shadow. Maddox looked at Hannah, his voice low. "You've got to choose, Hannah. The town, or him. You can't have both." She didn't blink. "I never asked for either." The sheriff turned and rode away, his shoulders heavy. But the deputy didn't. He left with fire in his eyes, a promise of return. That evening, Hannah sat near the fire, her arms wrapped around her body, tight, her soul coiled like a snake in her chest. "You shouldn't have come out," she told Takakota, not looking at him. "You're giving them more reasons." He stirred the fire with a stick. The flames hissed. "They do not need reasons," he said. "Only excuses." She stared into the fire, tears stinging, but not falling. "I used to believe this land was home. Now I'm not sure it ever was." He looked at her, his face carved from stone, softened by firelight. "Home is not a place. It is a choice. And what if I chose wrong? She whispered, a long pause. Then simply, then we fight for it. The next day, the church doors slammed when she walked in. Mothers pulled children close. The preacher turned his back. Outside the saloon, men fell silent. One muttered, "Witch." Another threw a stone at hit her shoulder. Hard. She didn't. Stop. She didn't cry. But something inside her cracked. That night she returned home bruised and hollow. A small object sat on her porch. Woven straw and feathers. Simple. Beautiful. Protective. Apache charm. She picked it up, staring into the woods. She knew he was out there, watching. Not because he owed her, because something had been tied between them. Invisible, but strong. The wind howled that night, clawing at the shutters, whispering things she didn't want to understand. The lantern flickered. She lay in bed, wide awake. The echo of that stone still throbbed in her flesh. They would come again. She could feel it. Even the bones of the house knew. Midnight. A creak. Boots on boards. Voices. Low, oily whispers. Then the chicken coop exploded open with a crash. A scream. Feathers in the air. A torch thrown. Flames roared to life in dry straw, hungry and hot. Hannah grabbed the rifle. Still didn't know how to fire it. Didn't matter. She ran. Barefoot through the dark toward the light. 4 men stood in the yard, masked and wild with hate. One held rope. One held a branding iron, red with heat. Another held a bottle. And the last, Brody. Of course it was Brody, the man who owned half the town and wanted the other half. He'd wanted her land since James died, circled like a vulture. "Warned you, Hannah," he called out. "You feed monsters, you lose more than chickens." Before she could answer, the barn doors opened. Not with violence, not with noise, but with the quiet calm of death itself. Takakota stepped out. He didn't run. He walked, slow, deliberate, a predator already in motion. Brody raised his gun. Too slow. There was a blur, an arm, a sickening crack. The man with the branding iron screamed as the weapon was twisted from his hand and hurled into the dirt. One man ran. Another tried to fight. He didn't make it far. The last, Brody, stood his ground, his face twisted with fury. "You think you can scare me?" he spat. "You think you can beat me?" Takakota didn't answer. He moved. He stepped forward slowly, blood dripping from his knuckles like ink from a broken pen. The ground beneath him was dark and wet. In the moonlight, it almost looked like the earth itself was bleeding. His voice, low and grave, cut through the heavy night air like a blade. "Enough," Brody sneered, though his eyes flickered with something close to fear. "You're lucky she's here," he growled, stepping back just slightly. "If she wasn't, I'd gut you like a pig and wear your bones as trophies." But before he could move, before another word could twist its way from his cruel mouth, Hannah stepped up beside Takakota. Her hands trembled, but the rifle stayed. Level, pointed square at Brody's chest. She stood between the flames and the monster. "Try it," she said, voice soft but steady. "Go on, see what happens." Brody's smile faltered. "You wouldn't shoot me." She didn't blink. "I don't have to." Takakota didn't say a word, but his silence thundered louder than a war drum. Brody spat into the dirt and stepped back, shadows sliding across his face. "This isn't over." "You're right," Hannah said coldly. "It's just beginning." By dawn the fire was out, but the ash remained. It clung to the air, the porch, the hem of her dress. The yard smelled of smoke, blood, and feathers. Burnt feathers. Takakota's hands were raw, torn and bloodied from the fight. Hannah sat beside him on the porch and gently wrapped them in torn strips of her apron. The rising sun painted the sky in bruises, orange and gray, like the land was waking up with wounds too deep to hide. They said nothing, but something passed between them, thicker than smoke, stronger than silence. Blood had marked the fence. Truth had soaked into the soil, and something else had taken root, something not even fear could kill. Dry Hollow went quiet. No more stones, no more warnings, no more sheriff, just silence. And in many ways, silence was worse. A town will shout when it's scared, but when it goes quiet, that's when it starts to plan. Hannah kept her head down. She mended the chicken coop, fed what birds remained, fixed things with hands that had learned how to stop shaking. And Takakota stayed. He never asked to. He simply stayed. As if the land now breathed with both their shadows, as if it had always been his, too. He repaired the barn roof, sharpened tools, set silent traps that caught rabbits without pain. They didn't speak much. He waited for her to eat first, never sat too close, never stepped inside the house, unless she asked. He lived just on the edge of her space, close enough to feel, far enough not to scare, but in that quiet space between what he said and what he didn't. Something new began to grow. One night, she found him sitting by the fire, cross-legged, carving something small from a piece of dark wood. The flames flickered on his face like whispers from the past. Above them, stars blinked like old eyes, watching. She sat beside him. "What are you making?" she asked. He didn't look up. "Memory." "For who?" A pause. "You," she blinked. "Why?" He kept carving. "You gave me water. Then you gave me choice." She tilted her head. "What choice?" To stay. They were quiet a long time, the fire crackling between them. "No one else would have," she said at last. "Not in your place." He glanced at her then. "Just once." "You would." It wasn't a compliment, it was truth. She smiled faintly. "I used to think kindness was weakness. James, my husband, he said it would get me killed." Takakota didn't ask about James, didn't say sorry, just waited, so she went on. "He wasn't cruel, just cold, proper. He believed love was something you owed, not something you showed." Takakota turned the carving in his hand. It was becoming a bird, a hawk, maybe. Its wings spread wide as if ready to rise. "And you?" he asked softly. She hesitated. "I used to think I had to earn love, that if I worked hard enough, smiled enough, stayed quiet enough, maybe someone would think I was worth it." He looked down at the carving. "You were always worthy." The words hit her like a storm breaking through drought. She didn't reply, but her eyes burned. The next morning, she found the hawk on her windowsill, smooth and strong, carved with care, a single black bead tied around its neck. She ran her fingers over the wood, then tucked it into her pocket, close to her heart. That day she made real cornbread, even though it meant using the last of the good flour. She brought it to him near the fence line. They ate together in silence. Because what lived between them now didn't need words. It was older than language, born in fire, raised in shadow, held together by presence, not promise. The first time she touched his skin, it was an accident. They were moving a beam on the barn roof. Her foot slipped. Her hand caught air, but his hand caught hers. Strong, calloused, careful. She looked down at the scar along his forearm, deep and old. "How did you get that?" she asked. He let go of her hand slowly. His voice came low, like it had traveled a long way just to reach her. "I was 13. The soldiers came." She didn't move. Couldn't. Not as Takakota spoke, his voice barely louder than the wind, yet heavy like stone. "They said we stole cattle," he murmured. "We didn't." His words came slowly, shaped by years of pain. "But they burned our crops anyway, took my brother, set fire to our lodge like it was nothing but dry kindling." He stared beyond her, far past the barn, past the trees, seeing ghosts only he could recognize. "My mother. She pushed me out the back," he continued. "Told me to run. I didn't want to. I screamed. I begged her. But I ran." He rubbed a thumb along a raised scar that split the skin from wrist to elbow. "A soldier's blade caught me. I bled under a cedar tree. 3 days. Alone. I thought the forest might bury me before the pain stopped. Hannah's voice broke. What happened to your mother? He was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, they killed her. Left her body in the ashes for the wind to find. Her knees weakened, hands trembling as she reached for the heavy beam they'd been lifting together. I'm sorry, she whispered. You didn't do it, he said. Still, she replied. I'm sorry. He looked at her then, really looked. That's why I stay, he said. Because I'm sorry? No. His gaze didn't blink. Because you remember what others choose to forget. That night, rain came like judgment. It slammed against the roof in sheets, soaking the earth and waking the bones of the land. Thunder growled like some ancient god stirring in its sleep. The air turned thick and electric. Hannah stepped out, onto the porch, her shawl clinging to her shoulders, the wind pushing wet hair across her face. Behind her, Takakota stood, silent as always, a shadow in the rain. Do you miss them? She asked, her voice carried by thunder. Your family, he nodded once. I miss James, she admitted. But I also don't, he tilted his head, curious. He kept me in a cage made of sweet words and expectations, she said. Told me how to dress, what to say, who to be. I think he loved the version of me he created, not the one standing here now. Takakota stepped off the porch without speaking, letting the rain drench him like a blessing. He lifted his face to the sky, arms barely raised, and the gesture, small, still, felt sacred. She followed. Together they stood in the storm, soaked to the bone, not touching, not speaking, just being. The storm didn't feel like chaos anymore. It felt like a baptism. Later, beside the fire, she rewrapped the bandages on his shoulder. The wound was closing, but new details revealed themselves. Scars. Dozens. A brutal map of his survival. One jagged mark curved across his ribs like a hook. Another dipped under his collarbone. There were burns. Cuts. One deep mark looked like it came from an arrow. She didn't ask. Instead, she whispered, Every scar is a story, isn't it? Takakota nodded. And every story leaves a mark. He met her gaze. Some marks, he said, lead us to the ones who can carry them with us. Her breath caught, because without meaning to, she'd started to carry his. And maybe, just maybe, he had started to carry hers. The rain passed, but the silence that followed was heavy and strange. There was peace on the ranch. For a while, the land felt softer. Even the chickens, those that had survived the fire, clucked in nervous relief. But Dry Hollow was never quiet for long. One afternoon, in the dusty loft of the barn, Hannah was cleaning out an old chest that had belonged to James. The wood creaked like it was groaning secrets. Under a stack of dried flowers and faded shirts, she found it. A letter. The paper was yellowed, the envelope stiff with age. She sat down on the rough floor, sunlight slanting through the rafters like blades, and unfolded it. To Mr. Brody, as discussed, I agreed to the sale of the property at the offered price. Once my wife is informed, I expect discretion. She's not ready to let go, but I am. James Moore. Her hands began to shake. The date, 3 weeks before James died. He had planned to sell everything, behind her back, to Brody, the same Brody who had tried to burn her home, the same Brody who led the townsmen with torches and lies. The air around her went cold. A silence fell so sharp it felt like a blade pressed to her throat. She stood too quickly. The chest toppled. Tools clattered across the floor. Takakota came through the barn doors like a shadow called by pain. Hannah? She held the letter, up, her fingers trembling. He was going to sell the land, she said. To Brody. Takakota took the paper, eyes scanning it once. His face didn't move, but something in him grew harder. You still have the land, he said. For now, her voice cracked. But if Brody kept a copy, he'll come back. With papers, a judge, a plan. And Her voice broke. I thought James loved this place. I thought he loved me. Takakota folded the letter slowly, placed it on the table. He loved control, not land, not you. It wasn't cruel. It was a release. That evening, Hannah rode into town. She didn't ask permission. She didn't leave a note. She wore the dress she hadn't touched since James's funeral. Hair pinned high. The woman they used to whisper about in church, now riding straight into the lion's den. At the courthouse, she asked for Judge Leland. The clerk blinked. You got business, Miss Moore? She held up the letter. I do. 10 minutes later, the judge, a stout man with tired eyes, and no time for drama, looked it over. My husband planned to sell the land, she explained, but he died before anything was signed. Now Brody is trying to take it, using threats. Fire. Fear. The judge looked up. Do you have proof? I have ashes on my porch, she said, and scars on my fence. There was a long pause. I'll look into it, he said quietly. Back at the ranch, the wind had turned. Something was coming. But so was she. She handed Takakota the letter. It's not over, she said. But I'm not running. He nodded once. Good. Then, without thinking, without fear, she stepped closer, laid her hand on his chest, felt the steady, solid breath beneath her fingers. I don't want to carry this alone anymore, she said. His hand rose slowly, resting over hers, not pulling, not forcing, just there, solid, steady, a promise without words. There was no kiss, no soft whisper of forever, just two souls, broken by different horrors, sharing a sacred silence too fragile for language. The next morning, Hannah woke before dawn. Her breath was tight in her chest, as if the night had never let her go. Outside, Takakota was already saddling the horses. He didn't ask if she was ready. She didn't say she was afraid. They both knew. The wind carried the scent of smoke from somewhere unseen. A hawk cried in the gray sky, sharp, high, and lonely. It didn't sound like nature. It sounded like a warning. They rode past the broken fence where blood had once soaked. The dirt. Past the chicken coop, now nothing but blackened wood and feathers. Past the place where shadows still seemed to gather at night, whispering the names of the dead. Hannah never looked back. Not anymore. By the time they reached the town square, a crowd had gathered, drawn not by justice, but by the scent of conflict. Brody stood like a jackal in the center, arms folded, lips twisted in a grin that didn't touch his eyes. His men flanked him, thick-necked, red-faced, ready to kill. Judge Leland waited on the courthouse steps, lips pressed tight, folder in hand. Hannah slid off her horse and handed the reins to Takakota. Her feet felt like stone, but she walked anyway, straight through the crowd, her eyes locked on the judge. Brody chuckled. Well, well, look who crawled out of her grave. She didn't even blink. Judge, you said you'd investigate the deed. Leland nodded and raised the folder. I did. Mr. Brody never filed a contract. There's no transfer of ownership. The letter you gave me proves intent, but not completion. Brody's face twisted. We had a deal. You had a promise, the judge snapped. From a man who is dead. That's not the same as ownership. The crowd murmured like wind rustling through dry leaves. Then Brody's voice rose, shrill and ugly. She's lying. That letter could be fake. You all know what she is. Living with an Apache like he's her damn husband. All eyes turned to Takakota. He didn't move. He didn't blink. But something about his stillness was terrifying. One by one, the townsfolk stepped back as if his calm was the eye of a storm, all, except Brody. His hand twitched. And then came the pistol. It happened in a blink. The gun rose. The world froze. A crack of thunder. A shot. But Takakota had already moved, faster than instinct, faster than reason. He struck Brody's arm with brutal force, sending the pistol clattering across the cobblestones. Then he drove Brody to the ground, knee on chest, hand on throat, not with rage but with certainty. Cold. Controlled. "Enough!" Judge Leland shouted. "Let him go!" Takakota didn't move until Hannah nodded. Then he stood, silent, while Brody lay coughing in the dirt, his pride shattered before the town that once followed him. That afternoon the judge gave Hannah a signed paper. "Your deed," he said. "It's yours, permanently." She took it with trembling hands. "Thank you." He glanced at Takakota. "You two might want to move farther out, for your safety." She looked at the man who had saved her more than once. "We'll think about it." That night the fire crackled quietly as they sat beneath a sky full of stars. She brought out 2 cups of coffee. They didn't talk about the courthouse, or Brody's shaking hands, or the faces that had finally looked at her not with hatred, but with something close to respect. "I thought I would lose everything," she whispered. Takakota looked at her with eyes that had seen too much. "You found something instead." She turned toward him. "What?" He hesitated, then said with soft, terrifying truth, "Someone." Weeks passed. Summer softened into autumn. The land, once brittle and scorched, breathed again. Leaves fell like quiet prayers, and Takakota stayed. He didn't sleep in the house, even when she asked. He stayed in the barn, mending wheels, setting traps, tending the land like it was holy. He never asked for more than a meal, never tried to claim what wasn't offered, but his presence settled over the ranch like an old spirit, grounded, steady, part of the land itself. One evening, as Hannah folded the laundry, she saw him standing by the well, not drinking, just staring. She approached slowly. "What is it?" He didn't look away. "This is where it began." She stood beside him, watching the shadows. "I was ready to die here," he said, "and you gave me life." "I didn't do much," she whispered. "You did everything." He reached into his coat, pulled out a small cloth bundle. Inside was a necklace, bone, turquoise, and a single raven feather, threaded with a wave-shaped stone. "What does it mean?" she asked. He touched the stone gently. "Water is spirit, memory, the bond between 2 lives." "And this stone?" "It means you are not alone." Her throat closed. "I made it for you," he said, "but only if you choose to wear it." She looked into his eyes, dark, endless, brave. "I choose." From that day, things changed. Not loudly, not quickly, but slowly, deliberately. A woman left eggs at the gate. A boy placed wildflowers on the fence. No one apologized. But the hate began to die like fire without fuel. Then, one afternoon, Sheriff Maddox rode up the hill. His face was unreadable. He removed his hat. "Council met," he said. "No more. Pressure. No lawsuits. Not now." She offered coffee. He declined. Then he nodded toward the barn. "That one ever going to leave?" She glanced at Takakota, who was sanding wood in the barn, oblivious. "He already has a place," she said. That night, beneath the stars, she leaned her head against his shoulder. He didn't move away. "Do you miss the life you had?" she asked. His voice was quiet. "Yes. But this is something new." They listened to the wind, to the breath of water deep in the well, to the silence that had once meant danger, but now felt like peace. Sometimes the strongest things grow from ashes. Sometimes love arrives without sound, without promises. It comes in fire, in rain, in the quiet presence of someone who never asks, but always stays. If you believe in stories of bravery, wisdom, and the fight for a better future, then stay with us.